Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Bordeaux Show. We're back at Georgian Military Museum, and before starting the show, I would like to congratulate Georgian football team to doing the impossible and beating Portugal at the time of the recording a few days ago. We actually won, and I'm not really a football fan, but I'm a Georgia fan, and congratulations to us and to many more great victories. And now, a few videos ago, we talked about these things. Firearms, guns, the boomstick. How I feel that modern fantasy really lacks them, and would be really nice that it was reintroduced in high Middle Ages, high fantasy stories. But there are some interesting comments, I feel like, that talked about, and I would like to make a counter argument or agree with some of them. The main point that most of them said, well, one was that I just don't like guns and I don't like modern day things that I don't like in my imaginary fantasy worlds, which is sure understandable. Personal opinions and personal tastes are a different matter. But another point, which was I think quite interesting, and I thought about it long and hard, was that more fantasy worlds do not need guns, firearms, and such things, where magic and mystery exists. The argument goes that in magical societies, technological advancements such as firearms, gunpowder, and things like that wouldn't exist because there are wizards who can shoot lightning bolts from their fingers, and there are mages who can call upon the sun to burn the earth. And that made me think that sure, if there are such mighty magic beings, especially if you look at ancient historical and mythical worlds, they didn't have guns because heroes could summon lightning bolts and pray to God for their aid, and such advancement, such technology wasn't really in demand for. And as we all know, all technology is created through demand. If there is a need, that someone or some force need to fulfill it, and usually that's where we get technology advancements and new tools and new ideas. And another point, going back to the wizards don't need guns, is that people who would in other ways invent gunpowder and invent guns wouldn't necessarily go down this technological tree because, well, let's look at how gunpowder came to be. Chinese, the great oriental alchemists from the Middle Kingdom, were trying to invent elixir of immortal life. They were alchemists. There were mages, there were magicians. They're trying to uncover unnatural ways of extending life. But they couldn't find the true elixir of immortality. They accidentally stumbled upon a explosive material such as gunpowder, and from there invented bombs. Here you go, bombs. Opa, cannons. Careful, careful, careful. Oh. And of course, this firearm. Here you go. This is the device. Pour it into the tube. Lock it in. Not this one. This is old one. This is more modern creation. And open this up. Then go there and bach. Sure. So, one argument that I personally struggled with justifying my love of early firearms to be introduced is that the people who would invent such technology wouldn't have need for it because the great minds would be able to achieve much greater things using available magic and sorcery and many cosmic forces and contacting otherworldly beings and such forth. This argument has quite a lot of merit because, contrary to popular belief, a lot of early scientists, and not just early scientists, many scientists, great minds, also dabbled in occult, mysterious mysteries, but they didn't have as consistent and reliable results from doing magic and alchemy as they had using science and technology. And that's why Newton is the foundational scientist, created the framework of science, was actually like not just Newton, every other like Da Vinci, Galileo Galilei, all of them were occultists first who couldn't get the results they wanted from magic and had to rely on science. Of course, this is just a reductive approach to it, but this is true that a lot of great minds tried to bend the world to their will through magical means, but weren't available to them. So they started developing physical technologies and less spiritual and cosmic and mysterious ways. This is actually a pretty good argument if someone who would invent technology such as firearms would rather create spells and magical woo-woo ajra-bajras, then it makes sense. No one would invent a gun if there was no one to invent a gun. This goes down to another path of what is magic, what is science, is there a difference to it, where is the underlying dividing line between them? Well, I would say that at the simplest terms, magic, magic in the real, my magic in the world that we exist in usually boils down to what many of us religious folk commonly do: prayer, asking for a divine favor from a cosmic otherworldly beings. Be it as a Christian, I pray to God, I pray to saints, I pray to angels for protection, for helping me pass the exams. They sometimes actually do help, sometimes maybe I don't deserve the aid. And this is the old approach to the universe, that cosmos is controlled by divine forces, conscious divine forces, maybe the humanized anthropological perception of natural events, or maybe the actual physical beings that control these powers. This is also another topic I would like to delve into, the perception of how actual religions, mythological religions, work, and how modern people kind of do not understand it. And basically, old school magic, old school mages were actually priests of Zoroastrian faith, would basically make prayers, make deals, make demands of these cosmic forces, calling upon either spirits, saints, angels, demons from the below, or God himself, for favors to actually help them bend the natural forces. This is the most simplified understanding of magic. This is, of course, what we call clerics, warlocks, druids, and many other types of magicians. But we consider, for example, wizards or sorcerers to be able to naturally, or through their scholarly knowledge, being able to bend the nature to their will without calling upon another force to their aid. Usually, this is the form of most common magic. Well, I wouldn't consider praying to Jesus for helping me pass psychology and philosophy exams to be magic, but praying to someone less divine and less holy might be. So, in this logic, that people who would naturally create scientific advancements, because to create a magic mirror, you just need a bunch of hocus pocus, but to create a magic mirror like this, you need centuries of advancement. Maybe the scientists, could never even imagine to see such technology, but centuries later, we are able, through technology, to do a lot of magical things that maybe even the greatest of mages couldn't dream of. This is the dichotomy between magic and science. People think that magic is when you have a pointy head, or science is when you have a lab coat, but at the end of the day, both of them do a lot of the same things. But in reality, difference is that both of them are using available knowledge and reliable, recreatable tools. This is the scientific method that you make an observation, you record it, you try to recreate it, and if it's recreatable, each time that it's done, it is a factual event. And this is the modern day how we bend natural world to our will. Before then, people perceived that natural forces had the will of their own, and to bend them, you must contact the regional administrator of lightning to call upon a lightning bolt. You would say, "Hey, Mr. Insert Sky Deity here, please call down the lightning bolt on this guy, and I would give you 5 whole sheep." The other guy would be like, "No, no, 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 Mr. Lightning Bolt Man, I would give you 10 sheep." And that's how magically minded society of ancient history would actually work. But now we do not contact Mr. Lightning Man. We actually grab the lightning by its balls and bend it by using dynamos and technology and reliable, observable methods that we can recreate. In most fictional worlds, it's not really much different methods used. It's just wizards are just scientists who do a lot of thingies because that's what works. So why hunker down, bend metal, make something like this, test out explosive materials when you can just do hocus pocus, Shazam, and fire a lightning bolt from a stick? This is, of course, a quite fine argument, but here is my counter argument to this argument, that this is from a point of view of a society where the mage, the magician, the wizard only cares for their personal advancement, that they want to create a magical ball or magical mirror to see the world and advance their personal views, and doesn't really care about the peasantry, the plebeians. This is, of course, another great argument to say how a fantasy world is constantly stuck in medieval age. I personally believe that it is not fun to have constant Middle Ages in your world, and I believe in constant cycle of time and civilizations rising, falling, technological or magical worlds being created and destroyed. Like I made a previous video about fall and rise of civilizations and flood myths. I personally prefer where society advances and goes down, up. You have Bronze Age fantasy that goes into Antiquity Age fantasy that goes into Middle Ages, then maybe even like constantly recycling. But in a world where there are mages, there are elite group of people, magic is usually available to limited group of people. Maybe they're born like that, maybe the knowledge is restricted, but usually in our world and in fantasy worlds, this type of knowledge was always restricted for the elite, and they used that knowledge to control the society and maybe stop its development. We can actually see in history, human societies naturally or unnaturally developed into castes. There were spiritual nobility, the clerics, the priests, the mages, the shamans, who were slightly above the kings and the nobility and warriors. So a pope is above a king, a bishop is above a lord, a priest is above the local, mayor or something. Well, there is like priestly class, warrior class, merchants and craftsmen and landowners and product makers. Then there are the servant class, the slaves, the serfs, the low skilled workers, and there are the untouchables. This is, for example, how Indian caste system works, which was actually, okay, a little bit of the deviation from a deviation, how it is a common theory. Okay, theory, we don't know how ancients actually proven facts about anything, but in the Bronze Age and even before, there was Indus Valley civilization, which were considered to be more flat societies. Like they said, they didn't have temples or castles for nobility. Everyone was equal. We cannot say for sure, but this is the argument. Then Northern Caucasian nomads domesticated horses, and those nomads, known as Aryans in the stories, went above Caspian steppe and went down into the Central Asia and South Asia and Western Asia. One group going into Iran and those areas, the other group going into India, and creating a caste system where their mages and their magicians had to be above, then the kings and this structure also exists all over Europe. Basically, Western Europe was divided into little kingdoms, but all of it was spiritually controlled by, in Western Europe, was controlled by Roman Catholic Pope.
Kings and warrior class were legitimized by the priestly class. The king had the divine right to rule, but the church coronated them.
In Eastern Europe, we had patriarchs who were much more egalitarian. I personally prefer it because, like, Georgia had its own patriarch. I don't know, Bulgarians had their own patriarch. Romanians had their own, and people had their own regional spiritual management that they all gathered into a council with big beards and big staffs and made decisions about spirituality. But that is a whole nother point. In this society, the spiritual leaders, the mages of the society, clerics and priests were above nobility, and nobility was above peasantry, and everything came down from there, and knowledge was distributed by the priestly class. They knew how to read, they knew how to transcribe information, translate it. It is a wrong perception of Middle Ages that everyone was uneducated. For example, in Eastern Europe, I cannot say for certain about Western Europe, but in Eastern Europe, plenty of people knew how to read because the local church provided, the local priests provided the knowledge to the people, to the children, how to read, write, read prayers. You can see all the Georgian temples have carved script, and not everyone, of course, knew how to read, but plenty of people knew how to read. Going back to it, basically this caste of intellectuals, the nobles, the priestly nobility, controlled the information. They are actually, need to give them credit, that a lot of scientific advancement was done by the church and by their patronage, but there are also a lot of information and knowledge not freely distributed. But again, giving credit where it's due, first universities and first available knowledge was preserved and transcribed by these religious institutions. So that gives us that if they didn't want some knowledge to exist, they just wouldn't transcribe it and translate it. But giving them credit, they did a lot, they saved a lot. Like Middle Eastern scholars saved a lot of works of Aristotle and Plato. Many other scholars preserved ancient information that then later in the High Middle Ages and Renaissance period was reintroduced to Europe, and then scientific revolution and Enlightenment era and technological age was created. Okay, this was a massive ramble aside. Going back to the main topic about wizards and guns, and why wizards hate guns is the basic logic that this class of people first wouldn't need to invent such crude technologies, when they have such elegant weapons. Like in Star Wars, for example, lightsabers are considered elegant weapons of noble knights.
This is the weapon of a Jedi Knight, not as clumsy or random as a blaster. An elegant weapon for a more civilized age.
But the blasters are considered lesser weapons for the stormtrooper and the smuggler.
Hokey religions and ancient weapons are no match for a good blaster at your side, kid.
Knights themselves were landowning class whose noble goal was to defend the lower producing classes, uphold the law and justice, defend the weak, and live up to the chivalric code of honor. But unfortunately many didn't, and used the legitimacy given to them by the church to exploit the masses, as they had time, resources, and skills to become the unstoppable killing machines.
Basically, beforehand, warriors need to train for their whole lives to be able to use weapons properly. For example, to be able to use a bow an arrow, as I mentioned before in my previous video. You needed your whole life from childhood to adolescence to adulthood to be actually valuable soldier and reliable with your bow, which was actually for a very long time much better than a regular gun, because while you fire one bullet which is maybe doesn't hit the target, you can actually fire multiple while you're reloading this. But it takes weeks or maybe a month to train someone to use a gun, and it takes years to your whole life to be good at a bow and arrow. Of course, we have a crossbow, which is somewhere in between. It takes much less time to train, but it's much more expensive and is somewhere in between. But going back to the topic, availability of guns for lower classes gave them the ability to rebel against their lords and demand more rights and flatten the society. As the saying goes, colt made man equal. And the availability of such weapons would actually threaten our theoretical mage society as well, because having a gun who can shoot much more deadly rounds than a mage's firebolt, having the ability to make something a grenade that can do far more damage than even a fireball would threaten the social system created and the hierarchy created by the oppressive mage.
The early forms of firearms were adopted by the knights, but more importantly, it gave the non-professional fighters the ability to equalize the playing field. One of the best examples has to be the Hussite Wars, which were religious and national uprisings by the Bohemians inside the Holy Roman Empire, who were dissatisfied by the corruption and decadence of the Catholic Church and demanded reforms and greater autonomy, basically early version of the Protestant schism, which resulted in a massive conflict where the church called upon crusaders and many other Catholic knights to crush the rebellion. This is a very interesting and complicated topic that I am not qualified to delve deep into, so be sure to look up others who can. But I want to focus on the motives of the rebellion. Freedom fighters, the common man, from farmer John and his family to local forest bandits, all uniting to fight against the oppressive religious institution and the evil inept empire with its powerful religious warrior class who should easily crush the peasants with low training and farming tools for weapons, but add in new technology of firearms and ingenious tactic of using carts as mobile defense structures, catching the heavily armored cavalry quite off guard. Using carts as makeshift barricades, knights who were close-range fighters couldn't get in the melee range, and archers couldn't see from where the carts rebels were shooting from. Ingenious design until knight manages to break through. Then the table turns once again. This is such a spicy story. I'm shocked more people don't know about it, and more stories don't use it for inspiration. But who'd invent such a technology in a fantasy setting?
But I believe gnomes and dwarves, the stout folk, spirits of the earth, unlike elves and humans who would be more hierarchical and oppressive. I don't believe dwarves and gnomes and such fantasy creatures would use their knowledge and their skills to only benefit themselves, and proper gnomish wizards would create not spells but tools, magical tools to help his common man and maybe make few coins as well. And this is why I believe if you need a technology, we need to have a logical reason how it evolved. Here is my argument how a typical fantasy society with dwarves, elves, and gnomes would create cannons, guns, bombs, and such. I believe cannons and such technology would be invented by dwarves because, okay, let's say they don't have access to gunpowder, they would have access to earth resources such as gases and oils that are hidden beneath the earth, but you can use it to make a combustion machine, not maybe not a gunpowder-based cannon, but a diesel or a gas-based explosive cannon, some rudimentary flamethrower or a machine that uses explosion or fire burning in its engine, and maybe some sprinkled of magic in. And they would invent a technology to protect themselves from their common predators, such as giants and dragons, which are quite large and intimidating. And even if you're a powerful dwarven warrior, if you're a mighty dwarven warrior, I don't believe you will be individually able to jump high enough to reach a dragon. So you need a tool to maybe reach them in the sky. So that's why you would need a cannon. A maybe based on the gunpowder. In my world, actually, dwarves use dragon ash made from dragon bones and meat and such as materials to gain for gunpowder. But you can use diesels, I don't know, many other resources available in the earth, maybe in coal or something, gas pressure or something, to make projectiles, maybe not something like a shrapnel to drop dragons from the air, maybe even like firecrackers to disorient them, or basically cannons would be something that I believe dwarves would invent to fight enemies from above. And later, same technology would be developed by gnomish tinkerers, because as I've stated in my previous comparing dwarves with Augustus and other societies, I believe gnomes should be more nomadic, if you will, who wouldn't be able to carry such large machines and weapons such as cannons, so they would make a smaller, more compact versions of it and use it to defend their caravans and their mobile carts, and maybe hire locals to protect themselves, and maybe even provide it to other fellow stout folks, such as halflings, because gnomes and dwarves are short, but they're strong and still able to use a lot of weapons. But gnomes and halflings are quite short, that maybe not able to use anything more than a spear. They wouldn't even have limbs long enough to bend something like a bow. So best weapon for them would be something like a crossbow or a boomstick. I believe this is the best weapon for small folk who cannot defend themselves against larger and stronger humanoids. And basically, this is me trying to justify existence of fantasy hussars and fantasy Cossacks to fight halfling Cossacks and gnomish hussars in my fantasy world. So this is what I believe, that maybe some people like elves or humans or other societies would create a privileged class of limited access for magic, but I believe gnomes, dwarves, and halflings would create magical tools and think of magic not as end-all be-all, but just another way to make a tool for like metal or other materials they already use for their advantage. This is what I usually love when fantasies make dwarves and halflings and gnomes more technological based than other societies, because it of course gives them more flavor, but creates a dichotomy between long-lived races of elves who make spells and secrets that they do not share, like spend hundreds of years making a secret spell that they will never share with anyone else. But on the other side, gnomes who constantly dedicate and make new products so they could sell and provide benefits for their fellow friend. So I respond to basic arguments of how fantasy societies would develop with magic, how technology might be limited, or how another society would use magic as technology to benefit themselves. Thank you for watching. Thank you to my dear subscribers who like and comment. Of course, great thank you to my Patreon supporters who helped me actually make these videos, and another great shout out to Georgian footy team who finally defeated the great Goliath Portugal, which was nobody was expecting it, and it is a really happy day for us. And thank you for watching, and of course, thanks to Georgian Military Museum for providing such beautiful space and access to such great weapons. Thank you and take care.